This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's time for another episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guests on the podcast today are Kai and Drew of Aslin Brewing in Herndon, Virginia. Before we jump into that conversation, I just wanted to highlight a few things that we have coming up. First, the Craft Beer and Brewing annual Best in Beer issue is coming up in 2 weeks. Friday, October 19th, magazine should arrive or start arriving to subscribers, and we will make that digital switch over so that digital issue is available to you. That same day, John Hall, our senior editor, and I will jump on a podcast together and do a special edition of this podcast highlighting our winners from our Reader's Choice, Reader Survey, as well as his and my picks for our favorite breweries of the year and our editor's list of the 18 best beers in 2018. So stay tuned for that. A couple of events that we have upcoming. A brewery accelerator event for breweries in planning and young breweries happening in Denver, March 3rd through 6th. For more information or for tickets, check out breweryworkshop.com. Also next June 9th through 12th in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, our annual Brewers Retreat returns to the East Coast for a few days of small-scale brewing with some big-name brewers like Jason Perkins of Allagash, Phil Wymore of Perennial Brewing, Will Myers of Cambridge Brewing, Neil Fisher of WeldWorks Brewing, and a few more that have yet to be announced, but will surely be fun to brew and hang with. Come join us and our brewer friends at this fantastic event. For more information, check out brewersretreat.com. All right, now on to the conversation. My guests on the podcast today are Kai and Drew from Aslin Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
How you doing today?
Good.
Am I supposed to lean in and say thank you? Or should I just sit back here?
We may actually kiss if we get really close. Yeah.
So
Anyway.
tell me a little bit about this history of Aslin. You were mentioning earlier you started off with the 2-barrel system, brewing all the time, nonstop, and did 700 something barrels in your first year of operation on a 2-barrel system. But you also noticed an interesting evolution for the brewery because you started with a pretty typical brewery strategy, and then kind of pivoted with the market into this hazy, fruity, stouty kind of approach that you take now. Just give me a quick couple-minute arc for how that has looked for you guys as a brewery.
For us as a brewery, completely unexpected because, like we were saying a little bit before, we were more interested when we launched this place trying to make products that worked for everybody, and quickly decided that we didn't give a shit about that and wanted to make beers that we really enjoyed. It just happened to be hazy stuff. They were just barely creeping onto the market. A couple people were doing those things, like we were talking about Treehouse, Trillium, Tired Hands. These are literally the only people I can think of.
Brothers.
Yeah, Bissell. And then us little guys were just like screwing around with that stuff as homebrewers, and we're like, hey, we've got this 2-barrel system, essentially oversized homebrewing, let's do this. And it took off. I mean, we didn't realize not only what size beer community we had here in Northern Virginia, or how many people would have been interested or dedicated to that product, or how quickly we converted people who were like anti-IPA into IPA drinkers because of that style specifically. And it just kind of skyrocketed. And it also tends into like the whole, what we were discussing a little bit about, like beer nerds dictating how your business grows based on their trade values, and the community demanding what products you make based on how often or how quickly they'll drink them. So our business model has kind of been guided a little bit more through historical trends based on products that people like or enjoyed or we have positive feedback for, and less about like what our aspirations for the market really are.
So that point in 2015 when more people started kind of jumping on this hazy bandwagon was an interesting one, because getting actual details about how those beers were made was kind of a challenge. You had to do a fair amount of kind of reverse engineering and speculation and test batching to kind of figure out how to even make these beers. Talk to me a little bit about your process on that.
We actually had a good footprint from home brewing. I mean, we made Mind the Hop many times through home brewing, the Underground, which we don't really make much of now.
So Mind the Hop, which is the beer you guys still release commercially now, started out as a home brew.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing that now for 5-6 years.
6 years, yeah.
And just further refine that to our palates, and then that became the building block of everything else we make.
Tell me a little bit, what are those building blocks? Like, what did you find? And now, one of the things that changed, and depending on where you are, your water chemistry, you're going to have to make different adjustments to that. But, and obviously there are different hop preferences. What were some of the kind of foundations that you found about that beer?
Yeah, it was a combination of what your grist composition was, what your, like you said, water profile. We've always tended to lean more towards a softer water profile, so more calcium chloride. We didn't do the whole traditional more high gypsum salt to accentuate that sharp bitterness in the beer. Temperature that you whirlpool at was really important to us. Temperature that you dry hop was really important to us. Fermentation temperature. We played around with it all. Everyone has a different theory on what produces the best product, but we've tested it even as commercial brewers and have come to a specific process that makes our beers unique or taste Aslin-esque.
So one thing that we had conversations about as we started the brewery and then revamped those initial product offerings was, where are we getting our inspiration from, and how are we building this product to be us? We took a lot of inspiration on executables from tons of different industries, and like for instance, the whirlpooling stuff, we were looking at coffee industry and extracts in coffee and coffee blooming, and like how people are drawing more flavor from coffee at such high temperatures, and immediately found correlations. And we're like, okay, well, we can look at that as an element to launching our whirlpool program and hop standing programs and things along those lines. And then we started looking into like, well, how does other elements of the culinary world really apply to what we're doing? And we found even more caveats to like steal from this industry or that industry and apply here as brewers. So that's another thing that we're always looking at, not necessarily following old guard and tried and true test methods from within the brewing industry. Not that they're wrong, but they should be questioned. And that was a mindset we took on to kind of build new product or a new approach to making traditional product. If that makes sense.
What surprised you the most? What were some of the things that you discovered that may be counterintuitive that you found through that process?
Well, I think the first thing that we noticed right away, like Drew was saying a few minutes ago, is simplicity. Like as home brewers and looking at clone recipes or people talk about recipes, is like there's 5 or 6 different malts in a homebrew recipe. For what reason? And well, you need a little bit of 2-row for sugar extraction, but you need a little bit of carafoam and 60L and melalloidin for body and color and head retention, why can't we just find one element that does that, or simplify this and go back to the basics, right? So we started doing a lot of that.
Yeah, generally we have like from a grain bill 2, maybe 3 different types of malts.
Yeah.
And we found that keeping it simple has created the best product.
Are there some favorite varieties for you in that you find produce the kind of malt body and complexity that you need to kind of support this kind of aggressive hop regimen?
Yeah, it really depends on the style, but for IPAs, we try to lend more towards like Maris Otter or a pale malt, and then some combination of flaked products, oats, wheat, etc.
Yeah. What kind of ratios do you use around those?
For flaked oats, we do easily 10 to 15%.
Yeah. The high end would be 80-20.
Yeah.
We'll go as high as 80-20 and as low as, I think one product has like 5% oat in it. But yeah, we're usually in that 80-20, 90-10.
So more didn't produce a noticeable result for you, or?
That's our opinion.
Yeah, no, we found it's
all I want from you here is your opinion.
Oh no,
well, there are no objective rules or laws.
Well, I'm just thinking about what every other brewer right now like that will listen to this podcast will be like, well, that's bullshit. I know, like fucking 60-40 works or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like whatever works for you, man. Cool.
It's also a combination.
If everybody agreed on everything, then we wouldn't need to talk about these kinds of things. So, throw it out there.
Screw all you 60-40 people. Yeah, no, I guess what we're saying is just, if we can't notice a difference, we're not going to waste the time.
Right.
Making longer louders and runoffs and all that kind of crap. and make it harder on our brewers. But if we can notice a difference, we're going to continue to do that, which is why we went through all these experimental stages 15 and 2016. Just like every time we executed this known product that we had, what's the one thing we're changing this time, and is that different? Is that noticeable? And can we trace that down to being the change in the executable or the change in the recipe? And if we like it, do we continue to do that, or what are we changing next time?
Yeah.
And there are other things in the recipe that lend to bigger mouthfeels, whether it's your water composition, mash temperature, etc.
Yeah. Salts.
Speaking of that, water, that's a core ingredient and a core component in this. And we talked a little bit about, how you treat it, but where does your water come out of the ground at? Do you guys reverse osmosis treat it? Do you strip it down?
We use gallons of Poland Springs.
Poland Springs, just stand up there every day. Ours comes out of a hole in the floor.
Yeah.
We don't really know where it comes from.
Yeah.
Bunch of elves down there. It's a big well.
It's a mystery, man. Who really knows how plumbing works anyway?
Yeah, it's just town of Herndon water
Yeah.
that we treat to make it our own.
Yeah, so that was one of those other conversations we had about, like what's true to the historical brewing world, like the guys that are replicating Munich waters and Vienna waters and whatever, like stout Guinness water. Yeah, Burton-on-Trent water. It was like that. Those dudes were just making beer with the stuff they had available. So why wouldn't we do that? And that's what we decided to do. And that was Town of Herndon water. The only thing that we get is like whenever yearly or quarterly or whenever they're treating it, we have to be prepared. Like one day we're gonna have this huge pH drop or spike based on how much chlorine they're throwing in the damn thing, right? So, and we've seen that. And we're like, all right, well, what's the remedy? That's kind of the game. But other than that, we're pretty true to that. When we move to Alexandria and we start brewing there, we're gonna have to revisit this because I know the water there is gonna be different, and we're not necessarily concerned, but we have to look at how are we gonna bring it back to the product type that everyone knows. So hopefully it won't be too difficult.
Do you have an ideal chloride sulfate ratio that you push for?
2 to 1.
Yeah. So pretty standard.
Yep.
Yeah, we have one product that's 4 to 1, and that's interesting. So.
Yeah, I mean most of our IPAs and double IPAs have a different ratio.
Yeah.
And that
must make it fun for your brewers.
Yeah.
No, I mean they have a recipe sheet. It's pretty easy, but that just came from testing out, different ratios, and we found that certain beers we like to have a little bit larger, mouthfeel. We'll add more chloride to it, and vice versa.
Yeah. Maybe talk about hops for a little bit. Obviously, most consumers, look at the name of the hop on there and have some idea about what it tastes like. What is your approach there? You are constantly creating, behind you I see a roll after roll after roll of label for different beers. You produce a very, very wide range of them, and are constantly trying to create a new and exciting experience for the people that are drinking your beer, because that's what your consumers want. How do you go about building that kind of interest, and while at the same time making sure that you're producing the quality of beer up to the standards that you want to release?
Most of our recipes, like I was saying, are food inspired or drink inspired. Right. So what we do is we say, hey, we want to make this beer or IPA have these flavor notes to be modeled after a cocktail or whatever. And then we go out and see what different hops are out there and what we can add and what we can get out of each hop. And we add a different hop to a whirlpool to get clementine or whatever out of it, and that's how we kind of make our recipes or generate our recipes.
Coming at it from a production standpoint, I mean, it's hard to just throw it in there and get something and go through this long test process that could be several weeks from the time you do that to the time you get a result. How have you guys honed in a sense for these just from rubbing and sniffing to kind of get an idea for how these combinations are going to work?
All of 2016 we did that.
Yeah.
We would just make, so Mind the Hop really is our base double IPA beer. We make all the Johans with that beer, any Mind the Hop variant, any of the fruited IPA variants with vanilla, like our 50/50 bars, sorbet, all that is Mind the Hop. Yeah. And before we launched these different fruited and Johan series, they were designed to be like pilot batches in-house for what happens when we do this with Citra, or like what happens when we do this with Nelson. And we just learned from trial and error and throwing things away and wasting a little bit of money that this temperature at this time, or during this stage in fermentation, or during this section of dry hopping, we got the result we wanted. We noted that, and just we're very analytical and data driven about how we were testing things. So in the future, when it came time to actually make like an all Nelson beer or something along those lines, we were like, well, this is how we want to start our executables. And if the product comes out good, we'll remember that. If it doesn't, then we'll adjust. And lucky enough, we've been pretty close on guessing based on, oil levels and alpha acid levels. Like, this is how we can handle X product when we know those numbers. So
we also were a 2-barrel system, so
right,
being able to experiment is a lot easier, and we can sell out of that beer relatively fast. If we started as a 15 or 30-barrel system, our process may have been different. We may have been brewing on a Sabco half-barrel system to really evaluate what type of profiles those hops are going to have on our beer. But having a 2-barrel system, you do 60 gallons of something, it's going to go quickly, and having a good idea from home brewing what those hops will add allowed us to play around a little bit as we've grown.
And your customers have rolled along with you as you did that and enjoyed the test process. Was there a feedback mechanism there, or was it simply just talking to people?
Untappd. Yeah, we created a beer.
You say that with a cringe as you cower away from the microphone.
Well, Drew's going to show you this label for One Star, but everyone has like their ups and downs with the social media world. It's a demon. Just look what they're doing to the poor president. No, I'm just kidding.
So these are what our customers think of our beers.
No, there were
for those listening. I mean, when I'm looking at a label here with actual comments from 1-star ratings on Untappd, where you've taken the worst that people have said about you and made it a brand.
The PG-13 stuff.
Okay. Okay. Utterly disposable. There really needs to be a return option. Not a very good beer. Smells like poop, tastes weird, but I don't know what else to say. Stop being weird, Aslin.
As much as like this complaint, a 1-star review can seem like hurtful and whatever you want to interpret from it, it's also, first off, funny. But secondly, there is some valid feedback here, right? There, you as a brewer, or you as a producer of a product might have made a bad decision, and this guy's letting you know you should rethink it or retest it. But if he stands out as like that 1 in a million that was just like not digging the product that day, like, okay, take it for that, right? And move on. Maybe there's a bunch of other 4 or 5-star ratings that are cool, and
There's an interesting point about Untappd, and I try to have this conversation with brewers because some folks do take it personally, and it's hard when you are putting your creative blood, sweat, and tears into something, and people don't take it as seriously or look at the stakes the same way that you do as the product creator. It can be disappointing, frustrating, and it can lead to some negative reactions. But when people use online rating systems, they are rating it for themselves. They are rating a beer whether they like it or not, because they're using that as a tool to remind themselves what they had that they liked. They are not, and you can't expect from a consumer to objectively rate against the rest of the world of beer this thing that they're drinking, because they don't have that experience. Yeah. They don't have that breadth, and they don't approach an app that way. They are approaching it from do I like this? And that's why, I see the half-star rating, I don't like stouts, half-star. I'm like,
why are you checking them in?
Why'd you order a stout? Why'd you rate that?
Everyone feels that way.
And you'd think that, but it makes sense for them. Like, well, I thought it was a 0.5. It might be a great beer, but I don't like stouts. So for me, it was a point. Like, it's rational.
Yeah.
On the standpoint, from the standpoint,
I would totally love to adopt that perspective, and I absolutely agree that for some people, I'm sure they're using Untappd as like a note-taking system to remind themselves. But too many times again, I see people like be the first one to check a beer in, and the next comment is, was it worth going to get? Or like, is this worth buying? Blah, blah, blah. Like, well, if it's for that one individual, then why are we building a commentary around it? And I feel like Beer Advocate has become this way. There's a very small amount of people that use Beer Advocate anymore because it's such like a heavy system, inundated way of like rating, and you have to really be involved and passionate about making a review of something because it requires so much of you, that there are a handful of guys who do that for everybody, and there's 10 times as many more people who go on and read what that guy just wrote, and they use that as their influence marker. Untappd is the shortcut version of that for people who've never been exposed. They go on Untappd and they look at like what the most recent ratings are, what the overall rating is of that product, and they go, okay, this is or is not worth my time based on whatever their mental scale of like acceptable good products might be. And like that's, I don't know if that's a fear not people should have, but it's definitely something to be aware of when launching a brewery.
There's an interesting question about that because, especially when you start talking about millennials and social media users, a significant portion of luxury consumption, and I think we have to refer to $16 to $20 4-packs of beer as
luxury for sure.
Luxury consumption. I mean, these are not staple goods. These are not core necessary food items. They're a luxury item. And a lot of our luxury spending today, at this, whether it's a nice meal out at an expensive restaurant or a $20 4-pack of beer, is built around the social media validation for your individual choices. Yeah. And so from the standpoint of that consumer, they want to get a sense that they will be validated for making that spend. Yeah. And so I think that's where some of that kind of give and take comes from. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Would we have people willing to spend this on high-end products like this and these luxury goods if they didn't get a sideline benefit of that social media validation for their own personal choices, or would they, just go back to buying whatever's on the shelf?
It makes beer like a team sport, right? Everyone's getting a participation award with that one thumbs up, I do not disagree with that. It's definitely sad if that's the case. Maybe, and I don't know if it's sad. That's wrong to say, I guess. It lends to some very interesting dynamics between consumers and producers, right, or manufacturers. This dynamic that's created between their opinion and what your value or perceived value, right?
Right. So, what are some of the weirder ways that's manifested for you guys?
So we talk a lot about, imagery infringement, like the way our labels are specific to how Mike Van Hall's made them, and how many other breweries see the success in like our Instagram or the photos that Liz Trax does for us for Instagram, and the exposure we're gaining. Like as soon as you start seeing like those themes or ideas show up in other people's labels, like that whole, what is that old world saying of like, replication is like a form of flattery, like they're copying
imitation, purest form of flattery.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. And it's so true. That is absolutely true from across the board, whether it's our labels and our product style or our beer, the product we're producing. When you start seeing like we're the forerunners in like being stupid with IPAs as far as making them taste like dessert product, but in an IPA format, like a pecan pie or cinnamon toast crunch beer. And I don't know if technically I should say we're the forerunners in that, but I know we've done it, and not a lot of people are doing it. And now you start seeing like
pastry IPAs,
exactly. You start seeing that stuff pop up like generally close to you, and you're like, okay, well, maybe they also were interested in that idea and it just happened to happen around the same time we did ours, or they think we had mild success with it and they're interested to see how it goes, right? They're testing the waters. So
what did make you decide to make pastry IPAs?
All right, so this goes way back to that conversation in the beginning where we're back in home brewing, and I was like an idiot at the time, clearly still am. I want to make a white stout. And everyone was like, well, basically you're talking about like a barley wine or a wheat wine or something like that. And I was like, no, it's going to be more like an IPA, but with all the same crap you get in stouts, right? And it just finally came up to the point where we had a tank open one day, and I was like, we're going to do this thing. And he wanted to push a beer that was more like a stout around Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I finally was like, let me do the IPA with your Cinnamon Toast Crunch thing. We're going to make it work. And it killed. And it worked out fantastically. So again, going back to like not following old guard rules, not like feeling like we've been put in a box, like all those adjuncts and goofy shit that people think that our pastry style beers should only go into dark stouts or dark ales, like barley wines and stuff, that they can be executed well across the board in other product lines. It's just trippy for consumers, and they're looking at like what looks like a hazy New England IPA, and then they drink it and it tastes like Cinnamon Toast Crunch,
Now, there are some brewers out there that think you may be the Antichrist for going that direction.
There's tons of brewers out there that think that we're the Antichrist because we make hoppy New England style IPAs. Like this whole East versus West Coast bullshit and this like haze versus non-haze thing. Like, God, I wish we had a time machine to go back in time when macro beers in the 60s and 70s were watching the first micros pop up, making the West Coast beer, and then how like if we could mimic the availability of opinion through social media or direct thought of another like stream of conscious bullshit that people do on Twitter, like what those macro guys would be saying about the first few IPAs or West Coast style IPAs. You know, like how blasphemous it is to like add this much or to do it this way. We haven't done it this way since the 1870s, and like nobody does it this way anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it would be so interesting to see the script flipped on these guys.
No, that's a really good point. That West Coast IPA was something dramatic and new and challenged all previous preconceptions. It was not something that was historically relevant to the way IPA had been made before. It was a completely different and new approach to push that kind of bitterness with that kind of, you know, non-ester, you know, yeast profile and come up with something that was so sharply bitter. And yet, you know, and at first there were lots of people that bristled at that, and then people got used to it, and then they started liking it, and then it became this de facto thing. But it really, I mean, it became a de facto over what, like 2005 to 2012? I mean, you know, we look back at it now because so much of craft beer right now in 2018, so many breweries are less than 5 years old at this point. And we think of that as this ancient past, but I started drinking craft beer in 1995 when I turned 21. Like, I mean, IPA wasn't a thing when I started drinking craft beer.
Yeah.
And so that West Coast thing has risen and then now kind of peaked maybe, and is watching another rise now of this New England style IPA. And at the same time, New England style IPA is going to peak at some point here. Agreed. And something else is going to happen because we can expect that much out of beer.
Agreed. 100% with everything you said. Plus, I like how fancy you make everything I took 10 minutes to say, like, surmised in one conversation or one statement. It's great.
It's my job as an editor. That's what I do.
It's fantastic. I wish you were here all the time. You would simplify a lot of conversations. But on top of that, the reaction isn't unnatural. Like the fear of something else coming in and stealing away what you know as your bread and butter or your staple house is a concern for people. And this is true across the board. It's not just beer, but it's politics. It's you know, people's lifestyle. And when something new and flashy comes along, it intimidates them and it scares them, and they have a gut reaction to say and do things that if they had time to stop and evaluate and really think about, like, that impact, would they say those things or would they do these things, and, like, you know, would they really want to hold themselves accountable in 10 years when they're also making this style or whatever happens, right?
It's kind of like skinny jeans.
Skinny jeans.
See all these brewers wearing skinny jeans.
Everyone wears skinny jeans. If they start wearing cutoff pants, I'm going to start smacking people.
So, I mean, at the same time, you guys run a business. You have employees. You know, you have a responsibility to the people who work for you. You have investment of money and time in this. I don't know if you have outside investors that have expectations, but, you know, you do have to have a business that's successful, and so you have to worry somewhat about, you know, how things are going, and hope, you know, and protect what you have. I mean, it's not a irrational thought to want to maintain what you have.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. It's weird. Why am I so complicit with everything you say?
It's like he's inside your mind.
He is in my brain. You feel that right there? Yeah, I'm fucking your brain.
You know, but for you guys, I mean,
you can put little bleeps on all these things, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, that'd be awesome. No one's ever done that for me before. They just let me swear away.
You can do that too. You know, but for you have to, you know, imagine every now and then the thought hits you late at night after you've been drinking a little bit too much, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, what happens if this goes away?
Yeah.
And what happens if, you know, if we don't have this to, you know, fall back on? And what would the business look like for you if that happened?
I don't know.
I know we pride ourselves, well, kind of are very competitive. So, one, we do whatever it takes, right? But two, I think we spend a lot of time researching industry trends. And
you've said a couple times that you're competitive, and, you know, the culture of craft beer is such that the idea of competition and being competitive might strike, you know, rub some the wrong way, but
we're used to that, so we just don't really care. I mean, it's kind of bad to say, but, like, we want to be the best at I do at least want to be the best at everything, and if it rubs another person in our town the wrong way, it's like, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, you spent some time at Crooked Run today. Like, those guys are our direct neighbors. They're our first line. They called us this morning for ingredients. It's not like we're so competitive we're going to be like, no. You know what I mean? We're saying we're competitive, and it sounds intimidating, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we're not going to be friends. We're not going to be friendly, that we can't work together, that we don't have something to learn from you or you from us. And like, we've never said no to anybody. We're still good people and nice. We're just like, if this is the field to play, we're in a game right now, like, we're going to win. We would like to win. We're out here to do our best and be the best at what we do. And like I said, we've definitely not achieved that yet. And we have tons of critics that are willing to tell us otherwise, which is great because we're using that as jet fuel to continue our search, right?
You know, I hear you. If I'm playing pickup basketball with friends, or if I'm out,
you're not tall enough for basketball. Get out of here.
No, I know. Or mountain biking with my buddies. You know, you goddamn right. I want to be the first one at the top of that hill, and I want to beat them. No, we're still friends.
Yeah,
and we're still going to crack a beer open. You know, as soon as we're done with the ride or the game. But I mean, you know, a little competition makes everybody better.
Yeah, sure. And I'm not. I will definitely admit that being so open about our competition has put us in hot water with other brewers. They are intimidated. They don't know how to deal with it. They hold you at arm's length, and that has an effect on both of those breweries. Yes, ours and theirs, because you can't have a good relationship if you're not willing to look beyond a statement as bold as we are competitors. You know what I mean? So.
You know, you mentioned as we were talking before the podcast that when you initially launched the brewery, you were pretty secretive about your processes, and you know, taking you some work and a lot of testing to come up with what you'd found. But over the last year or two, that you've kind of loosened the grip on that, and that you have been more open with sharing what you've learned out of that process. Why that change?
It comes down to as simple as nobody can do what we're doing. I could literally right now, I could hand you our brew recipe for the collab that we're doing with Bottle Logic tomorrow. And no one would be able to replicate that product. I have no idea what that's going to taste like right now, but if that was another recipe like one of these other ones we got here,
it looks like it's going to taste good, though.
It does look like it's going to taste good. Like here's Laser Raptors. This is one of our products that everyone knows. I hand you the recipe now. Like, nobody. There's the temperatures. There's the salts we're using. You know what our mash size is based on the conversation we just had. Like, there's our grist bill. Go make that beer. Make it Laser Raptors. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to do it. Like, you will be damn close. You could probably make something that most uneducated consumers are going to go, yeah, this is it. They did a good job making a clone, but it's not going to be the original product.
Real quick, I'm going to take a picture.
Yeah, take a picture of it. Put it on the Instagram. Right? And I mean, I sound very arrogant saying that, right?
No, you don't.
But it's the same though for us. Like, if Crooked Run gave us Raspberry Empress, I mean, it would taste like we made it, not.
Yeah. You're far from the first brewer to tell me the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's a pretty common thing, and I think that, you know, I think that most people that homebrew don't necessarily take that into consideration. That, you know, all of these recipes are starting points, and there are so many additional, you know, ingredient variables and whatnot that, you know, you ultimately, in order to make it taste the way you want to taste, need to make your own adjustments, you know, to all of these recipes, no matter what they are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, surprise. We're
and
only
technique.
Using...
I mean, technique is the whole additional layer on top of
we
that
like to call it
recipe
finesse
question.
here. Okay. We're fancy. No, but on top of that, like, surprise for the industry, we're using the same ingredients everyone else is using. We're using water. We're using some malts, some oats, some salts, and yeast. Like, all right. there's no big surprise. So you got some hops in there too. I don't know. I feel like I'm shocked by that.
Let's talk about some of your weird ingredients. You know, since you guys are known for these beers and these culinary beers, and let's talk about some of the ways that you found to get some successful results out of some of these stranger ingredients. Are there any specific examples that you can think of some out of the box culinary beer ideas where you know, that you learned something from the way that you added those ingredients into the beer?
The rosemary IPA. We did an IPA with rosemary in like the winter of 2016.
15, yeah.
Or 15.
December
of 15. And like, it came from a white paper we found on wileyjournal.com. There's like a whole brewing section of like PhD articles, and it was talking about like the extractions of linalool and geranol, right? I don't even know. Yeah,
Geraniol.
Thank you. And we're like, well, what other? And the article went into like, well, these other plants, and just like as a abstract just reference. They're like, well, these other plants that, rosemary and so on and so forth have these things in them, and it just lit a light bulb off in the three of us, and we're like, why don't we just try using rosemary and see what that does, right? And it worked out. I mean, obviously it had a rosemary flavor to it, but it also had like this citral element and was like really bright and flavorful and wasn't overwhelming. And we've done that beer like 3 times now. So, and by far, nobody knows anything about it. Other breweries have done this. We weren't the first to do it, I don't believe. But it's an underrated product, and I think it's a fantastic platform to say, like, look, we're different than just like hops in a beer.
And how did you go about adding that rosemary into the beer?
Originally, I think what we did was we pestled a whole bunch of it and steeped it as a whirlpool, and then had a small element in dry hop. So the last one, I think we did everything in whirlpool without pestling. We just hung the bag, knocked out onto it, and that heat extracted everything we wanted, fermented, and we were good.
Dried? Fresh?
Yeah, fresh.
Okay.
Fresh. Yeah.
From a sensory perspective, did it remind you of specific hops, or were there those hops characters that it kind of captured?
We also
or was
added
it its own
vanilla
thing?
to it to balance, because it does have that like
That bitter, raw.
pine-esque flavor, very herbaceous, but the vanilla kind of balances that out. Kind of reminds you of like a Thanksgiving meal almost. With you have that citrus cranberry thing that you could have at Thanksgiving. So citrus and pine and that unique rosemary flavor. Vanilla adds like this backbone or this artificial sweetness that people enjoy. I mean, that's the one thing I like about vanilla actually, is it's this backbone to other flavors, and it really allows you to accentuate cinnamon, for example, or whatever it may be.
Now, vanilla is an expensive ingredient, and it sounds like you guys use a fair amount of it.
Yep.
Yeah. The vanilla industry loves us, I think.
Yeah.
It's expensive, especially because we like to use like real extract or real bean or a combination of those two things. Not the artificial products or whatever reduced artificial products that are made of like ethanols and things like that. We're not interested in using them. We think that they're too easily detectable in product. So
let's talk about that a little bit. I like that idea of that mix of actual extract and vanilla bean, and that's something I have heard some brewers talk about, that it gives them that punch of flavor, but at the same time kind of grounding some of that extract flavor with the natural bean character. How do you guys go about getting that maximum effect out of vanilla?
We don't really
trial
know.
and error.
Trial and error.
I mean, everything's trial and error.
I'm not quite
right?
sure. It just worked out, and then we know, like, based on the ratio of product we're making, what we need to prepare and use.
Okay.
And, like, again, that came down to, like, this doesn't have enough. We need to use a little bit more. Like, you know what I mean?
Like tasting it after the fact.
Exactly. We got down to the point where we would like measure a sample of beer out of the tank and weigh it, and then know exactly what the weight of the adjunct was that we were putting in. So we'd have a definitive ratio, and then we would do math out and be like, is this a ridiculous amount of adjunct we're going to add to this tank, or does that sound ballpark right? And then make the decision whether or not we were just going to go ahead and execute that needed amount. It has worked so far, with the exception of lemon. That thing's a bitch. Lemon is like the worst. You always need more than you think.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you balance with vanilla again, with the bean versus extract? Is this a 50-50? Is it again, we're going to get into ratios because everyone in this kind of beer wants to talk about ratios.
Originally it was 100% all bean, then we moved to a 50-50. Now we're mostly extract with just a small amount of bean.
Yeah.
So
I think it depends on the beer.
yeah. I'm lending towards, like, on average, what do we normally do?
Are you?
Nah, I'm making it up.
Are there any more pastry or adjunct kind of ingredients that you've had interesting results with, that you found noteworthy, or that you found that your initial thought about the way you used it didn't work out and you had to go back to ground zero?
Yeah, well, so we tried to do the same thing with mint that we did with the rosemary fresh in the whirlpool, knock out on it, get an extraction. We over extracted. We made like this ridiculous mint bomb.
I don't know why you're saying we.
But I did it. It was my idea, and I was very confident that it was going to work. I was wrong. I'll admit that now. No, so it totally was like a learning experience. We're like, all right, well, now we have a better idea of how to do this next time. Now, obviously, juxtaposed to that, cinnamon we found really good ways of extracting cinnamon and getting the
Yeah,
result
we've learned the hard way that there are different types of cinnamon. Like if you're not paying attention, you're at the let's say grocery store and you're buying, I don't know, what cinnamon do we usually use? I always mix these up.
Well, it's not cassia. That's the wrong one.
Yeah, but someone bought cassia and it just gave a different type of profile that we did not want. It was harsher, I guess is the best way to explain it.
A little Mexican red hot flavor.
Yeah,
it was pretty rough.
So now it's like on our ingredients.
Yeah.
Generally, we order a bunch in advance, so it's not a big deal. But when you're a 2-barrel system and you're going through this process, it's easier to go to the grocery store, because we didn't know what the ratios were at that time. So that's one that I think we've learned. I don't know what else.
When it comes to adding these in the tank, do you all recirculate? Do you bag and drop in a tank, or how do you kind of maximize the extraction?
We've done everything you could think of, or you've heard from every other brewery about what they would have done, and we've landed on we prefer to load the bag, hang the bag, and then rouse the tank with CO2 and move the solution around the element we're adding versus recircling the entire thing.
Yeah,
we're afraid of oxygen, and we try to minimize that, the introduction as much as possible. I mean, you can purge it, but if you have a bad seal on a pump, you may not know till after the fact.
Yeah, or you just have one loose tri-clamp or something. You're just making a vacuum right there. It's too frightening to risk. Like we may be a larger brewery now, making 5,000 barrels a year, but that's still nothing. And when you lose a product that has like whatever X dollars of revenue it could be, it hurts.
Sure.
Right? So.
How about dry hopping? That's one where there are brewers are growing more attuned to the opening up the tops of tanks to drop hops.
Oh yeah, we've been doing that shit from the beginning. That's the only way we dry hop. We've gone through that whole evolution as well.
Yeah,
and we're still kind of playing around with a few things as far as like which hops work best where. Whether that's like fermentation hop additions, we're pretty settled on. We're not doing that. Post fermentation, what temperatures. And we always rouse the tank. So we have a process of like, essentially, if it was the same as an adjunct beer, we're adding hops, and for a series of days we rouse the tank. There's no recirculation. Right now it's down to like what temperatures are we doing that at, what ratios are we doing, like T90 to lupulin, or are we doing that at all? Right, exactly. So
and it's generally 2 to 3 days. There's diminishing returns after that.
Yeah.
So we have it down to time as well.
Really, I think the last thing that we're still working our way.
What temperature do you dry hop at?
Right now it's like 60 to 65 degrees.
Yeah. Okay, so relatively warm.
Yeah. And that's a pain in the ass when you have like a 40-barrel tank that we harvest. We've adjusted our yeast process as well to accommodate our dry hopping procedure. Yeah. So now we're harvesting beer for selection at like 50 degrees, just so that like in a day or two it can get back up to 65 to get the temperature range that we want for our dry hop.
What difference did you see compared to colder dry hop approach?
Way more flavor profile.
Yeah, just not as bold. Because when we were home brewing, or even on a 2-barrel system, we would test it. So we'd crash to 34 degrees, harvest the yeast, dry hop, keep it at 34 degrees, burst or agitate with CO2, or we would cold crash at 34, dry hop, let it free rise. But the difference between 4 barrels of wort or beer free rising and 40 barrels of beer free rising is it takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
So finding that balance as we grew was a learning process for us.
Yeah, so the last little bit of experimentation that we're working on right now is what kind of benefits do we get out of additions during whirlpools, hop stands, and time. Like for us, we've learned some fruits work better in a whirlpool at higher temperatures because of like this caramelization effect they would get, the same as if you would have accidentally burnt them in your pan as a home brewer. Yeah. And other fruits do not do well with that at all, and they get manipulated or destroyed beyond any kind of salvageable range. Some hops are the same way. You put a hop in the whirlpool, it gets degraded and destroyed over certain temperatures. A lot of guys that are doing hop oil extracts will tell you like 140 to 164 degrees is detrimental to a lot of hop oils that you're looking to retain in the product. So lower temperature whirlpools is kind of the way to go. We haven't worked our way down there. We have a number that's in that range or better that we prefer because of the one hop that we are executing a lot of at higher temps. But that might simplify some dry hopping in the future. If we can extract flavors in the whirlpool on a knockout, then wasting time to climb up the ladder and like throw 44 pounds or 66 pounds of something.
Are you still bittering early on or first wort? Or
we've eliminated all bittering in the brewery. So
eliminated all bittering. And so how then do you?
We haven't eliminated you.
Oh, God damn it! I am the most bitter element in this brewery. You will
100 IBUs.
I'm not wearing my Grumpy Cat shirt today, guys. Come on.
So then how do you achieve the bitterness goals for your
We're
beers?
seeing a lot of that come out of Whirlpool or early stage dry hopping.
Early stage dry hopping.
Yep.
So how much contribution do you see in bitterness from the dry hopping?
Well, we don't measure IBUs, but it
even from a sensory perspective.
Yeah, from the sensory perspective,
you can probably guess at an IBU contribution. And
I mean, what do you think about the beer you're drinking right now?
I don't know, 45 or so.
Yeah, I think so. Like the computer software we're using says like 32 IBUs. All the bittering comes from 212 degree whirlpool. So we preload the whirlpool on that one. It gets hit, then we cool it down, then we hop stand with another hop and then knock out. And then that has all 62 to 65 degree dry hopping for 3 days. So no kettle. And there's still a decent amount of bittering element in that product.
Yeah, and I can still taste it as it kind of lingers with a little bit of bitterness that becomes more apparent at the end of the taste.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is kind of our goal. On an IBU scale, we try to stay in this 25 to 45 range. Mm-hmm. We think that's a comfortable number, even though that in itself is subjective depending on the hop and the asset. Yeah, I think I made that up.
And I think even when we talk about numbers like that, it's useful to say like a perception of that, perception of 25 to 45, because your number can be higher than that in a technical sense, and yet if there's enough residual sweetness in the beer, it can lower what that perception of the IBU is.
Well, Untappd doesn't mind the hop, say like 140 IBUs.
I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, and I mean,
you guys know you can edit that, right?
Yeah. It's too much work. Now, who is the brewery that has like the highest IBU beer? Is it Ninkasi that has like that 121 IBU beer or something like that?
I don't know.
McKellar did a 1,000 IBU beer. Theoretical 1,000 IBU. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, no, we're nowhere near that theoretically.
So what's next on the horizon for Aslin? You all have ramped up your production, and you hinted at it earlier about a new brew house, but that seems like a big project coming on the horizon for you.
Yeah, so high level product stuff is finished the Herndon tasting room, which is also our sour barrel facility right now.
So right now you don't operate a tasting room. You are
we are to go only.
Just selling cans right out of the brew house.
We are the old treehouse model. Yeah, that's us. We package product Monday through Friday, and now we've moved to a model of releasing same day or the next day, and kind of just rolling with it as we grow. High level is open the tasting room in Herndon, which will facilitate mostly this production site. Launch and open the brewery and tasting room in Alexandria, and then from there get our feet wet with some regional distribution and kind of stabilize the market and reevaluate in the next year to 18 months like what is our next steps. So
this is a big move. This brewery that you're going to open, production brewery and tasting room in Alexandria, will take you from this 8.5 barrel 10 hectoliter system into a 30 barrel brew house, and a whole lot more beer. How do you? Is there a market for this?
Let's find out. I don't know. What do you think? He does a lot of the market research stuff and has a plan.
Yeah, I mean, you look at successful breweries in other cities. It's totally based on population. If you make a high quality beer in a population of 7 to 8 million people like we have here, we can be producing 30,000 barrels to 50,000 barrels, no problem, and sell it just within the region.
With that kind of population, multiple breweries can be producing that kind of volume of beer.
Yeah, we look at like Chicago, New York City, Atlanta. So, I mean, I think we can grow to be a fairly large brewery and not leave this DC, Maryland, Virginia metro area. Personally, I think Kai and I both agree. We don't really want to distribute to California and Colorado, like Bell's and Founders of the world do.
Sure.
We'll do spot distribution to larger cities because people that try our beer in those cities will tend to travel, or when they travel to DC, they seek Aslin out. But that will be our distribution strategy, and I think the market's ready for it. There's no one in this region that's really doing that yet. Port cities, maybe. They're at what, 15,000 to 20,000 barrels.
I don't know. Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, who
Vienna Lager would have been, Devil's Backbone would have been.
But who's really DC Brow? But other than DC Brow and Port City, there's really not like a huge regional brewery in this area yet, and we think we can fill that gap.
Yeah, there's a lot of us ramping up, like us, the Vale, Triple Crossing. All of these people have like either ramp up in place or facilities in place to do that. And now I guess it's not necessarily a battle because I think there's plenty of room for the three of us to do the same with the quality products that the three of us are putting out. So, and that's not an all-inclusive list. I'm not trying to exclude anybody here because I think there's plenty of other great quality product or people with the systems in place to do this stuff. It's just the willingness to do it. So, yeah, I'm excited. That's basically where we are.
So, yeah, big things on the horizon.
Big things.
I was really struck when I last night as I was doing some research was looking at the Church Key draft list. Mm-hmm. And, it's always an interesting bellwether for me to look at how these influential bars and, who they're putting on tap. And it was the breweries that you just mentioned. It was the Vale, it was U-All, it was Triple Crossing, filling out the hoppy category and a few other categories as well. And I think about the last time I went to Church Key, probably about a year and a half ago, I think it was a year and a half ago for the Craft Brewers Conference. And of course they had a different draft list at that point because there were a lot of folks coming in. But at various points in the past, I reference it here and there, and just looking at regional research, it didn't look like that a year and a half, 2 years ago. The breweries, you guys that are dominating that hoppy side of the list, literally only popped up on that over the last year and a half. And it struck a chord with me, like, this is how fast beer is changing. With that kind of speed of change, are you worried at all that making a large capital investment in something huge like that could be a wrong decision?
Well, I think we look at it also as an efficiency play, right? So we're now doing 4 turns a day at 5,000 barrels. We can be doing 1 or maybe 2 turns a day to hit 8,000 barrels and still hit our same sales numbers that we're looking to hit at this level. So I think this move allows us to be a little bit more agile and adapt to the market at a quicker pace rather than where we're at now. Let's say lines go away.
Sure.
We're going to be if we stayed at this size in the system, we'll be putting in a lot of effort to produce a lot of beer, which is going to be different when we have a 30-barrel system, which will be, quote-unquote minimal effort, 4 times almost as less to produce the same amount of beer.
That's his very PC answer of saying, like, it's a challenge to be competitive in the market because there are a bunch of breweries that have popped up over the last few years, and this is not a shot or a jab at anybody, which means it probably will because I just
that's like saying no offense before you make
offense.
The statement.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And it's going to be offensive, but there are people who are mimicking products that are popular right now that just aren't doing well at it, and because of such the popularity in it, they're successful or doing okay, and they're able to maintain some kind of a base. At some point, there will be a shakeout. I don't know if this is a huge bubble that everyone's afraid of is going to burst. There will be a shakeout, and that means there will be availability in those tap spaces that have knocked other beers off for local to take place. And if there is a strong, good product that is still local, that is in a price point that those retailers and wholesalers are looking for, the play that we're talking about puts us in a position to advance into those locations when that shakeout does happen, if it happens. And if not, like Drew's saying, then it's easier on the staff to stay here and be happy and make decent amount of beer still.
How are you funding? Where's the money come from to
I'm
get into
I'm just pulling it all of my ass. Like, I'm just shitting money over here.
If that's off the record, you don't have to tell.
No, it's all funded through the cash flows here as well as 504 loan.
Okay.
So
we try to keep as small amount of debt on our balance sheet as possible.
Yeah.
So A lot of it's been just internal funding. We've been really conservative with our cash flow management. So,
yeah, the idea is like if this thing does go bad, that nobody loses everything. We can kind of walk away.
Where do you keep that kind of debt to revenue level? Again, if it's
I mean, right now it's the lowest it's been. I mean, we have no debt.
Wow.
So, that's a great place to be at this point.
It's a fantastic place to be.
So
yeah.
we can
except
just
if you're trying to garnish more debt.
Yeah.
They don't trust you.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I mean,
I always enjoy that, talking to Corey from Side Project, he's spoken to me at length about that. I mean, they have only grown through cash and they didn't take out debt to open a new brew house and taproom, and controlling your destiny by not owing anyone anything gives you a lot of flexibility out here in this business. And we're at a point where those breweries, whether it's Green Flash or whether it's Tallgrass in Kansas, who are over leveraged and or have that kind of debt overhang, I mean, they're going out of business.
Yeah.
Well, debt can be good, right? It can allow you to grow, but it's got to be manageable. It's just same with your personal finances. As long as it's manageable, it's like, everything in moderation.
And it seems like you all you're managing to make a reasonably high margin product, so that, and I think one thing that gets lost on beer consumers is they hear, expensive beer, but they don't necessarily consider, in a $16 6 or 4-pack or a $20 4-pack, is that also lets you pay people a living wage, pay health insurance, for employees, make these kinds of expansions and grow to improve their experience, and ultimately let you make better beer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that statement alone encompasses a whole bunch of issues that I think everyone in the brewing industry sees. One is the wage difference, because everyone interprets that this is a blue-collar job and that the people here are unskilled, labor employees, which to an extent can be true, but generally isn't. Like you were joking about before, a lot of guys that are in this industry are disgruntled engineers or like biotech guys that just decide to walk away from a job that have an education level that they have an expectation they're not going to be getting paid $10 an hour, or they're home brewers that don't care they're getting paid $10 an hour because they're doing a passion, they're involved in a passion. But it says much more about the consumer in general. They don't understand logistics, they don't understand price of acquisition and costs of goods sold, right? They just see the price tag and they think that instantly means revenue, and how that cost of goods changes based on ingredient type, and that these sexy things that they want, like Galaxy, are $30 a pound. Like a 4-pound to 6-pound per barrel Galaxy beer costs a shit ton of money to make when you extrapolate out just what those hops mean.
Right.
You know what I mean? And when the consumer doesn't
think about
see
that, because if you have a half barrel keg, a 15.5 gallon keg that a normal bar might spend $150 on, you could have $150 worth of hops in a single, well, actually maybe 150 in two of those kegs across two of them. And so, half of the cost of that keg could just be the hops, and that and paid for labor or all the other expenses that come in, to make that beer.
But the problem is, because they have that mindset of blue collar workers, blue collar product, meaning beer, which is, in my opinion, beaten into them from the macro side of the world.
Yeah.
They think that equates to price point. Because you're a blue collar worker and because it's a blue collar product, it should be blue collar pricing, and that's not true. They don't ask the same questions of the wine industry or the liquor industry. As if you spent any time on the bourbon trail and you talk to them about like what a bourbon bottle and a mash really would cost them if they sold everything in that cost range or with like whatever minimal margin, we would never be trying to hunt Weller bottles for $200 a piece. You know what I mean? Like,
especially they're using cheap ingredients. It's corn.
It's grain and corn, right?
Like cheapest forms of sugar out there.
It's super interesting. And the best dynamic is to look at the wine industry, not to negate anything that's done in the wine industry, but people don't ever ask questions about like what the cost of a bottle of wine is, and they equate that to quality, right? Like the same equation we were talking about before about distribution equaling quality. Like an expensive bottle of wine does not mean it's a good bottle of wine. Granted, a cheaper bottle of wine probably means it's not a good bottle of wine, but it doesn't mean that it's awful.
Right.
And there is a balance there, right? And a comfortability to challenge that is where the consumers enter the market, especially in the beer world. They're comfortable to say like, well, I know better because I know what Budweiser is, and like I see it in my grocery store, and it should be X dollars. Well, there's a whole series of things that go into mitigating that cost and your perception of those things.
I mean, that's kind of like walking into a high-end clothing store and saying like, "Oh, I know that Walmart sells a shirt for $4, so you should charge $4 for that." I mean, there are ways to get consumer goods down to that price point, but that involves exploitation. That involves, third world country labor. It involves a massive carbon footprint, of transporting goods overseas. I mean, it involves, depressing wages of your own employees so that they have to take federal assistance just to make things meet. I mean,
or if you're talking about food, chemicals in the food, that artificial flavors.
So, I mean, you just described my future business model, which is open a brewery in Malaysia with children and feed them chemicals so that I can make beer at cost.
Feed the kids chemicals.
Feed the kids chemicals, like Soylent Green. Well, that's actually people, but anyway.
Max profits.
Max profits. I mean, nobody's asking those kinds of questions, right? And like we're making a joke of it, but it is true.
Right.
The one thing that we were investing in our employees is like, hey, listen, you're going to have a hard time for the first year or two here because we don't have a lot of money to pay on you, but we will get you guys healthcare. We will get you 401k matching. We will increase your salaries as long as you're showing the dedication and looking for ways to extend your stay here if you want to be part of this small family we have.
Did you talk about the progeny program?
We haven't even discussed progeny program yet. So but he's saying good leeway. Do you want to talk about the progeny program?
Sure.
Do you want us to just keep running the show? Should we ask you questions now?
Nope. Run with it.
Tell us about the progeny program.
I will, yeah. So one of our core values, or not really core values, is to keep our employees happy and retain good employees. We have a really good team now, so I created a program that allowed our brewers to make a brand basically within our brand. And the whole idea of the progeny program is to teach our brewers how to basically brew from grain to glass from a business side and brewing operation side. So they order the ingredients, they write the recipe, they create the processes, and with that, they get to keep the profit in the end with that beer. So we have small tanks for the beer. We also promised them that we would finance their brewery or help them find funding for the brewery when it's time for them to leave. So it creates a more well-rounded brewer, but it also creates a more dedicated employee in the end.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And the best part about being a small brewery with a program like that is that it opens their eyes. So like when their front of the house employees are selling the cans and they see $20 coming in per 4-pack or whatever that price is, they understand like, okay, well, there's $15.50 worth of ingredients in that set of 4-pack.
Right.
So like there's a very small margin. Now we have payroll and healthcare and the 401k matching going into that. Okay, there's a couple dollars left in that can for the business. So it opens their mind or in their eyes.
Yeah, it doesn't make I mean, if they didn't see that, they could say, wow, they sold 100 cases and each 4-pack was $20. What are they doing with all this money?
Right.
I think it kind of puts some things into perspective for them as they grow within their career.
Yeah, that kind of open book approach is a really good one. And then there are even big breweries like New Belgium that kind of practice that with their own employee owners and teaching even the production staff how to read a balance sheet and understand the ins and outs of the business and being honest with people. And it's a ethical way to move forward.
Yeah, when they get old and shitty, we'll euthanize them. It'll be clean. We'll just, take them to the vet.
Oh, he broke an ankle.
Broken ankle. Come over here. I got something for you.
Bring the sheet up.
Get the green juice.
Has that resulted in any new breweries yet?
No, not yet.
We have 3 people in the program.
Yeah.
I mean, it just started. It's a year old. Yeah. A few of them are talking about starting their own breweries, but again, I don't know if they're quite there yet.
Yeah.
It takes a while to really. They just started understanding like the financials behind a single turn.
Sure.
And they're busy in their own lives as well, so they have to brew on their own time. So
the other benefit or the other effect this could have is they realize that they sure as hell don't want to run their own business and grow an appreciation for what they have.
Yeah, one of our guys came out and said that. He's like, the logistic aspect of what you're asking me to do is extremely intimidating. Like, I don't want to be the dude making the beer, building the recipes, figuring out how to warehouse all this shit, and then still having to contact these people to make sure that all of those elements can align correctly. Like, that's extremely intimidating and scary. And if I mess that up, like, then the entire week or month or whatever shot, and now I got to reevaluate how I operate my business.
Right.
And that is so true.
Right.
You know?
Right. As I say to a lot of folks that want to start breweries, I ask them, well, what's your hospitality experience? You know, because that's what this business is. Like, part of it's production. But if you're running a tap room, part of it's also hospitality. Have you ever managed a hospitality staff? Have you ever dealt with the kind of employees that work in a hospitality environment? If you haven't, you should do some research around that, because folks can end up in a business that they didn't expect to be in pretty quickly.
Yeah, and if that isn't true of any of those breweries that have popped up on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, like with the awful things they've said to consumers, right?
Yeah.
Like the 1-star stuff, reacting to that. Okay, like that may be your gut reaction right now, and it make you feel better, but it's going to create bigger problems if you tell that guy those deepest, darkest thoughts you have just to insult him, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's not end on that note, but...
Take that, you dummies! And it's over.
But it's starting to sound like beer o'clock to me right now. And but Drew and Kai, I appreciate you all sitting in on the Craft Beer Brewing podcast. I'm looking forward to trying a little bit more of your beer before I have to jet on to my next location here in Northern Virginia. If people want to learn more about Aslin, where can they find out more about what you do, or absorb some of the beautiful photography that you talked about earlier?
Instagram and Facebook are the two accounts that have the most attention right now.
And you guys are what, at
Aslin Beer _Co.
Yeah. Do you want to give them your number? They could text you,
Yeah,
too.
you guys can text me at 703-999-21.
No!
Yeah, no, actually, it's at Aslin Beer Co. is the Instagram, and then Aslin Beer Co. Facebook.
Look for an upcoming story on Aslin Beer Company in Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, we really hope you'd subscribe to the magazine. We put a lot of work into making sure that we can give you high quality content, and I'm pretty sure that these guys are going to share one of those recipes that we talked about in the upcoming magazine story.
Why don't you put out a Twitter poll and see, or Instagram poll, and see which recipe these people want, and we might abide.
A Twitter poll. Nobody uses Twitter anymore.
The president uses Twitter every day.
Exactly.
MySpace, bro.
Yeah, can you put a poll on MySpace?
Or text Kai at.
Or text me at.
Well, you can subscribe to our magazine at beerandbrewing.com. You can also find us at Craft Beer Brew on other social medias like Instagram. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Cheers.
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 This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.